The great space station known as the Accord of Stars hung in the silent blackness. It was a beautiful thing, made of crystal and light with sweeping arches and delicate spires that glowed softly. For 100 cycles it had been the place where the great species of the galaxy met to talk. They came to make peace, to form alliances, and to decide the fate of worlds. Inside the main hall, the air was warm and filled with the sounds of many voices. There were the Glycians, tall and reptilian with scales that shimmered like oil on water. Their leader, Ambassador Kalar, moved through the crowd with a slow, confident grace. He nodded his long head, his large dark eyes taking in everything. He was pleased. The conference was going well, and his people were in a position of power. There were other species, too. The Boreans, massive and broad, with 4 strong arms and thick gray skin that looked like stone. They spoke in low, rumbling tones. The Xylos were small and bird-like, covered in fine blue feathers. They chattered nervously, their large eyes blinking quickly. Dozens of other kinds of life filled the room. Some had shells, some had tentacles, some floated in the air. It was a gathering of the galaxies great and powerful. All of them had one thing in common. They were looking at the main landing bay doors. They were waiting. A new species was coming to the conference for the first time. A species called humanity. The stories about them were strange and unclear. They came from a world with harsh weather and strong gravity. Their star was unusually active. Their world was filled with life that was often poisonous. The data was incomplete, but it suggested a dangerous, violent planet. The galactic community was nervous. What kind of creatures could come from such a place? A soft chime echoed through the hall. The Glycian ambassador raised a slender hand, and the crowd grew quiet. "Esteemed delegates," Kalar said, his voice a smooth hiss. "It seems our new friends have arrived. Let us welcome them with the grace and openness that defines this accord." The great doors to the landing bay slid open with a silent, smooth motion. Every eye turned to look. The ship that sat in the bay was not what anyone expected. It was not sleek or beautiful. It was a block of metal, dull gray and covered in small scars and marks. It had no elegant shapes, no glowing energy fields. It was a simple, solid box with engines on one end. On its side, in simple white letters, were the words UN's Challenger. It looked less like a starship and more like a cargo container that had been thrown into the void. A low murmur went through the crowd. This was not the ship of a great power. It was the ship of workers. A hatch on the side of the blocky ship opened with a loud, clunking sound. It was not a quiet, elegant sound. It was the sound of heavy metal moving. A ramp extended and touched the floor of the bay. 3 figures walked out. They were bipedal, with 2 arms and 1 head. They were dressed in simple dark blue clothes without any decoration or jewelry. They looked plain. They had soft skin on their faces and hands, no scales, no feathers, no protective shell. They looked incredibly fragile. The first one was a man who seemed to be in charge. He had black hair and calm, observant eyes. He walked with a steady, relaxed pace. This was Captain Lee Jun. The woman next to him was slightly smaller, with her hair tied back neatly. She carried a small data slate, and her eyes were bright with curiosity as she looked around the hall. This was Dr. Park Soo-min. The third was a man who walked a step behind the others. He was solidly built, with a quiet face that showed no expression. His eyes, however, were constantly moving, watching the crowd, the doors, the ceiling. This was Mr. Kim Tae-shik. They stopped at the bottom of the ramp and bowed together, a small, polite gesture. Ambassador Kalar glided forward, his long robes sweeping the floor. "Welcome," he said, his voice friendly. "Welcome to the Accord of Stars. I am Kalar. We are honored to have representatives of humanity join us." Captain Lee Jun stepped forward and gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you for your welcome, Ambassador. I am Captain Lee Jun. This is Dr. Park Soo-min, our science expert, and Mr. Kim Tae-shik, our security liaison. We are grateful for the invitation." His voice was translated by a small device on his chest. The words were correct, but the tone was very calm. There was no excitement, no fear, no awe. It was the tone of a man who was simply doing his job. Kalar found it interesting. Most new species were overwhelmed by the station. These humans seemed focused. "Please," Kalar said, gesturing to the main hall. "Join us. We were just beginning the social reception. It is a time for informal introductions." The humans nodded and followed him into the great crystal room. The other delegates watched them carefully. The humans did not swagger. They did not try to look important. They just walked, their steps firm and even on the polished floor. The reception began. The humans moved through the crowd. Captain Lee Jun spoke with several ambassadors. His answers were short and direct. Dr. Park Soo-min asked many questions about biology and chemistry, listening intently to the answers. Mr. Kim Tae-shik said almost nothing. He just stood near the others watching. It was then that a Borean diplomat decided to test the new guests. The Boreans believed strength was the most important quality. A species that looked this soft could not be trusted. The Borean, named Groth, was huge, taller than any human and twice as wide. He moved through the crowd, his forearms pushing others aside gently but firmly. He carried a large drink in one hand. He made his way towards Mr. Kim. As he passed by, Groth stumbled. It was a very clever stumble. He put all his weight into his shoulder and slammed into Mr. Kim with enough force to knock a full-grown Glycian across the room. It was a test. Would the human break? Would he fly back and crash into a wall? The sound of the impact was a dull thud. Mr. Kim did not fly back. He did not cry out. He barely moved. His body absorbed the force of the blow. His feet shifted slightly on the floor, bracing himself instinctively. The drink in Groth's hand splashed, but Kim remained standing solid as a rock. Groth stared, his four eyes wide with shock. He had hit what felt like a small mountain. Captain Lee Jun immediately stepped forward. He bowed slightly to the confused Borean. "Please excuse us," Lee Jun said, his voice still calm and polite. "We are still getting used to the local gravity." "We were in your way." Groth just stood there, unable to speak. He had tried to show dominance, and the human had not even recognized it as an attack. He had apologized for being in the way. Mr. Kim simply looked at the Borean, gave a small silent nod, and then resumed his watchful stance. He did not seem angry or threatened. He seemed uninterested. The entire room had seen it. The whispers started again, but they were different now. "Did you see that?" The Borean hit him full force. He didn't even move. He didn't even react. What are they made of? Ambassador Kalar watched from a distance, his mind working quickly. His initial assessment was wrong. These humans were not fragile. Their simple ship, their plain clothes, their calm voices. It was not a sign of weakness. It was something else. It was a lack of need. They did not need beautiful ships to prove they could travel the stars. They did not need fancy clothes to show their status. They did not need to shout to show their strength. The thought was more frightening than any show of force. A species that did not feel the need to prove anything was a species that was utterly sure of itself. The first seed of fear was planted in the heart of the galactic community. They had expected monsters or warriors or proud kings. They had found something they did not understand. They had found 3 quiet, calm humans who were harder than stone, and who apologized when you ran into them. The peace conference had just become much more complicated. The second day of the conference was dedicated to cultural and biological exchange. The Great Hall was arranged differently. Instead of standing groups, there were now rows of comfortable seats facing a large, clear screen. The purpose was simple. Each delegation would share basic information about their species. It was a way to build understanding and trust. Ambassador Kalar stood at the front. "Today we learn about one another," he announced. "We begin with our newest members. The delegation from Earth has agreed to share first." He gestured to Dr. Park Soo-min, who stood up and walked to the front. She held her data slate and seemed perfectly calm. The other delegates shifted in their seats. After the event with the Borean, everyone was curious. What were these humans? Dr. Park offered a small, polite smile. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said. "My name is Dr. Park Soo-min. I am a scientist. I will try to explain some basic things about humans in a simple way." She began with the human skeleton. An image of a human bone appeared on the screen. "Our bodies are supported by an internal structure called a skeleton," she explained. "It is made of a material we call bone. The main mineral in bone is a composite hydroxyapatite matrix." She meant it as a simple scientific fact, but in the silent hall the translation filters worked. The word composite suggested advanced engineering. Hydroxyapatite matrix was translated into the closest equivalent for many species. A reinforced, crystalline mineral structure. A whisper went through the xylos, the bird-like scientists. Scholar Vryn, who was small and covered in delicate blue feathers, turned to his colleague. Did she say their internal structure is a composite mineral? He whispered, his voice trembling slightly. They have a built-in rock framework? That is not a biological structure. That is architecture. Dr. Park, unaware of the growing concern, continued. This structure is very strong for its weight. It allows us to move easily on our world, which has what we consider standard gravity. She then showed an image of a broken bone healing over time. If a bone is damaged, our bodies can repair it. The healing process creates a temporary structure called a callus, which is eventually replaced by new bone. Sometimes the area becomes even denser than before. The delegates stared. They could see the crack in the bone, and then they could see it mending itself. The idea was shocking to many. The Glycians, for example, if a bone broke, it often never healed correctly. They relied on external braces. Scholar Vrian made a small, nervous note on his own datapad. Self-reinforcing repair. The damage makes them stronger? This is a terrifying survival adaptation. Dr. Park then moved on to the muscular system. She explained how human muscles worked in pairs to create movement. She mentioned that humans had different types of muscle fibers. Some are for quick, powerful movements, she said. Others are for endurance, for activities that last a long time, like walking or running for many hours. The Borean diplomat Groth, who was sitting in the back, shifted uncomfortably. His people were strong, but they tired quickly. The idea of a creature that could keep going for many hours was unsettling. Strength was one thing. Relentless endurance was another. Next, Dr. Park talked about the human integumentary system, which is the skin. Our outer layer, the skin, provides protection, she said. She showed a diagram of a cut healing. When the skin is damaged, the body forms a clot to stop bleeding. Then a protein called collagen forms a web across the wound. This becomes a scar. This scar tissue is very tough and durable. In the audience, a delegate from a species with very sensitive gelatinous skin let out a small gasp of horror. Their skin, if cut, would often lead to a fatal loss of internal fluids. The humans not only stopped their leaks quickly, but they patched the hole with a material that was very tough. To them, it sounded like humans could instantly create biological armor over their wounds. Dr. Park then came to the part that would cause the most fear: the immune system. She explained that the human body was constantly defending itself against tiny invaders like bacteria and viruses. One of our primary defense mechanisms is the immune system, she said. Special cells in our body seek out and destroy these invaders. This was familiar to many species. But then she gave an example. A common response to infection is called a fever, Dr. Park said. When pathogens are detected, the body's internal temperature is deliberately raised. This creates a less hospitable environment for the invaders, as many cannot survive the higher heat. The room became very still. She continued. Another response is inflammation. The body sends extra fluid and cells to the area of infection. This causes swelling, redness, and heat, but it helps to isolate and destroy the pathogens. She was simply describing a fever and a swollen gland. But to the Galactic delegates, she was describing something monstrous. Scholar Vrin's feathers were puffed out in alarm. He whispered to his neighbor, his voice tight with fear. They deliberately cook themselves from the inside to fight illness. They wage a thermal war inside their own bodies. And this inflammation? It is a deliberate biological containment and purge protocol. The idea was horrifying. Most species had immune systems that worked subtly, using specialized chemicals or cellular processes. The human method was brutal. It was a scorched earth policy inside their own bodies. They would rather burn than surrender to a germ. Dr. Park, seeing the stunned silence, assumed she was being clear and helpful. She decided to conclude with a positive note about human adaptability. Because our homeworld has many different environments and challenges, she said, the human body is very good at adapting. We can adjust to a wide range of temperatures, altitudes, and food sources. Our bodies are quite resilient. She used the word resilient. She meant they could get used to hot or cold weather. The galaxy heard something else. They heard that humans were designed to survive anything. They could live where others could not. They could eat what others could not. They were impossible to kill through simple means like disease or a harsh environment. Dr. Park smiled again. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions? For a long moment there was only silence. The delegates looked at the small, calm woman at the front of the room. They no longer saw a scientist. They saw a high priestess describing the anatomy of a perfect, unkillable warrior. Ambassador Kalar was the first to speak, his voice slightly strained. "Thank you, Dr. Park. That was most enlightening." He chose his words carefully. "The aggressive nature of your biological functions is remarkable." Dr. Park nodded, misunderstanding the comment. "Thank you. We find it quite efficient." She walked back to her seat between Captain Lee and Mr. Kim. She sat down and whispered to them. "I think it went well." They were very attentive. Captain Lee gave a slight nod. Mr. Kim's eyes scanned the quiet, fearful crowd. He saw the wide eyes and the tense postures. He saw how the Borean Groth would not meet his gaze. He saw how the little bird-like Xylos were huddled together. He leaned over to Captain Lee and spoke in a very low voice. "They are afraid, Captain." Lee Jun watched the crowd for a moment. He saw the same things. He thought he understood why. "It is to be expected, Kim. We are the new ones here. We are unknown. Fear is a natural reaction to the unknown." He was correct, but he did not understand the depth of it. It was not a fear of the unknown. It was a fear of what they now thought they knew. The galactic community was now convinced. Humans were not mere creatures. They were a biological masterpiece of survival. Their bones were reinforced stone. Their wounds created armor. They purged sickness with internal fire. They could endure anything. And the most frightening part was that the humans themselves did not seem to think any of this was special. Dr. Park had presented it all as simple, basic biology, as if every species should be like this. As the next delegation took the stage to present, no one was really listening. The hall was filled with a tense, heavy silence. The delegates were lost in their own thoughts, imagining a world filled with these resilient beings. A world that had created such terrifying creatures must be a place of unimaginable violence and competition. The peace conference was no longer about welcoming a new species. It was about learning to live with a species that, by its very nature, seemed designed for war against the universe itself. And they had done it all by simply explaining how a fever works. The atmosphere in the station had changed. After Dr. Park's presentation, the other delegates looked at the humans differently. Their calmness was no longer seen as politeness. It was seen as control. Their simple strength was not seen as practicality. It was seen as power. Ambassador Kalar knew he had to understand more. The physical facts were terrifying, but perhaps the mind was the key. Perhaps he could find a weakness there, a way to relate to these creatures on a psychological level. He invited Captain Lee Jun for a private talk in his personal chambers. The room was comfortable, with soft lighting and a wide window showing the stars outside. Kalar offered Lee a seat and a drink, which the captain accepted with a quiet thank you. "Captain Lee," Kalar began, choosing his words with care. "Your Dr. Park gave us a fascinating look into your physical nature. It is clear your species is remarkably durable, but I am curious about the mind. How does a species with such a vigorous biology handle the mind? The stress of space, for example. Long voyages, isolation." Lee Jun took a small sip of the sweet blue liquid. He thought it was a simple question about mental health. He decided to be open and honest. "It is a good question," Lee said. "Space is very big and very empty. On long trips, humans can feel alone. To handle this, we focus on resilience." Kalar's interest sharpened. Resilience? The tension in the conference hall was now a physical thing, like a thick fog. The talks had moved to a critical point. The issue was the distribution of a rare mineral called Kesslerite. It was vital for the faster-than-light engines of the Glycian and Borean fleets. The only known source was a single asteroid field in a system claimed by both. Ambassador Kalar stood at one end of the large, circular table. His voice was calm, but his tail twitched nervously. "The Glycian claim is based on historical precedent. Our scouts mapped that system 10 cycles ago." Groth, the Borean diplomat, slammed a heavy fist on the table. The sound echoed. "Your maps are dust. The Borean Empire mines the field now. It is ours by right of labor." The other delegates watched nervously. The Xylos shifted on their perches. A species of molluscan beings retracted slightly into their shells. This was the oldest problem in the galaxy, and it was about to blow up the peace conference. If the Glycians and Boreans went to war over this, it would drag in everyone else. Captain Lee Jun watched the exchange. He saw the anger, the pride, the stubbornness. He saw two parties trapped in a loop, repeating the same arguments. Dr. Park leaned over and whispered to him. They are not looking for a solution. They are only looking to win the argument. Lee nodded. It was inefficient. It was a waste of time. He watched as Kalar and Groth argued for another 20 minutes, getting nowhere. The other delegates offered weak compromises that both sides immediately rejected. Then Lee Jun did something that broke all protocol. He did not ask for permission to speak. He did not raise his hand. He simply stood up. The room went silent. All eyes turned to the human. Ambassador Kalar. Delegate Groth, Lee said, his voice quiet but clear in the sudden hush. This argument is circular. You are discussing who has the right to the mine, but the real problem is that there is only one mine. Groth snorted. This is a deep insight? We know this. Lee ignored the sarcasm. Dr. Park and I would like to consult our ship's database. May we have a 1-hour pause in the session? Kalar was confused. What could their database possibly have to do with this? But he was also desperate. The talks were failing. A 1-hour pause is granted, he announced. The delegates broke into murmuring groups. They did not understand what the humans were doing. Were they giving up? Were they contacting their homeworld for instructions? Lee Jun and Dr. Park did not return to their ship. They simply walked to a quiet corner of the hall. Dr. Park opened her data slate and connected it to the station's public information network. She pulled up the star charts of the region. She pulled up the geological survey reports for the Kesslerite asteroid field that everyone was fighting over. Then, she and Captain Lee started cross-referencing. They looked at the mineral composition of the asteroids. They looked at the type of star in that system, its age, its asteroid belt formation. They typed quickly, their fingers flying over the screen. They were not looking for a legal answer. They were looking for a scientific one. On her slate, Dr. Park called up the public records of deep space scans of nearby unclaimed systems. She looked for stars with similar ages and spectral types. She looked for asteroid belts with similar orbital characteristics and mineral signatures. The other delegates watched from a distance. They saw the two humans working in silence, their faces lit by the blue glow of the screen. They were not arguing. They were not posturing. They were just working. It was a kind of focus they had never seen in a diplomatic setting. Scholar Vryn, the Xylos scientist, fluttered closer, his curiosity overcoming his fear. What are they doing? He whispered to Dr. Park. Without looking up, Dr. Park answered, We are looking for other places where Kesslerite could form. The conditions in the original system are not unique. If the mineral is there, it could be in other similar systems. Vryn's beak dropped open. The idea was so simple, yet no one had thought of it. The Glycians and Boreans were so focused on the one prize they never considered there might be more. Within 45 minutes, Dr. Park looked up at Captain Lee. I have 3 high-probability candidates, all in unclaimed systems within a reasonable travel distance. The preliminary scan data from Galactic survey probes supports the hypothesis. Lee Jun nodded. Show me. She turned the slate. He looked at the 3 star systems, the data on their asteroid belts, the probability percentages. Good, he said. That should be enough to end the argument. When the 1-hour pause ended, the delegates returned to the table. The mood was still tense and sour. Ambassador Kalar was about to call the session back to order when Lee Jun stood up again. Before we continue, Lee said, we believe we have found a path forward. He gestured to Dr. Park, who sent the data from her slate to the main screen in the hall. A star chart appeared. The disputed system was highlighted in red. Then, 3 other systems lit up in green, far from the disputed border. The conflict is over the only known source of Kesslerite, Lee stated, but our analysis of the geological prerequisites suggests it is not the only possible source. We have identified 3 uninhabited star systems with a 90% or higher probability of containing Kesslerite deposits of similar or greater size. A stunned silence filled the hall. Dr. Park spoke now, her voice clinical. System Beta 77 has an asteroid belt with a 94% metallicity match. System Gamma 12 has a 91% probability based on stellar remnant analysis. System Delta 49 has a 96% probability based on spectral data from long-range probes. She put the raw data on the screen. The scan reports, the chemical analyses, the orbital mechanics. It was all there. It was not a theory. It was a set of coordinates. The Glycians and Boreans stared at the screen. Their great conflict, the thing that was about to start a war, had just been solved. Not by a treaty, not by a compromise, but by a simple, elegant solution. There was more than one mine, but the galaxy did not see a simple solution. They saw a terrifying display of power. They saw that the humans, in less than an hour, with only a data slate and access to public records, had performed a strategic resource assessment that should have taken a fleet of scouts months. They had not just found a way out of the argument. They had found a way to make the argument pointless. Scholar Vryn trembled as he looked at the data. He whispered to the delegate next to him, "They did not try to win the game. They changed the board." Ambassador Kalar felt a cold dread. The human's first instinct in a high-stakes diplomatic crisis was not to negotiate. It was to analyze the problem and solve it with overwhelming, undeniable data. They had just rerouted the future mining operations of two major empires during a coffee break. Groth, the Borean, was the first to find his voice. How can we trust this data?" Captain Lee Jun looked at him, his expression as calm as ever. "It is not our data. It is your galaxy's public survey data. We just looked at it with a different question." That was the most frightening part of all. The information had been there all along. No one else had the kind of mind that would look at a diplomatic fight and see a simple data analysis problem. The argument was over. The Glycians and Boreans, their pride saved by the fact that neither had to back down, quickly agreed to jointly scout the new systems. The crisis was averted, but as the session ended, no one was celebrating. The humans had saved the peace, but they had done it in a way that made the entire galactic community feel small and primitive. They did not see problem solvers. They saw a species whose curiosity and intelligence were such powerful weapons that they could dismantle galactic conflicts before they even began, and they had done it without even seeming to try. The peace treaty was signed. The terms were favorable to everyone, but they were the terms the humans had made possible. The days of talking were over. The human ship, the UNS Challenger, was preparing to leave. Throughout the station, the mood was one of quiet relief mixed with a deep, unshakable fear. The conference had been a success, but the galaxy felt it had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back with calm, polite eyes. Ambassador Kalar stood in the main docking bay watching the final preparations. He had to know. He had to have one last confirmation. He needed to hear from the human captain himself what his species' intentions were. He walked towards Captain Lee Jun, who was giving final instructions to Dr. Park. "Captain," Kalar said, his voice respectful, "a moment before you depart?" Lee Jun nodded and stepped aside with the ambassador. "Of course, Ambassador." Kalar chose his words with great care. "Captain, your people have made a deep impression here. The things we have learned, your physical resilience, your psychological fortitude, your relentless problem-solving. It is clear to us now. It is clear why your species has survived so many challenges on your world. You are formidable." He used the word formidable, hoping to provoke a reaction, a hint of pride or ambition. Lee Jun listened. He heard the ambassador's words as a compliment on their diplomatic performance. He thought Kalar was being kind about their role in solving the mineral dispute. He felt pleased that they had helped create peace. He offered the Glycian a warm, genuine smile. It was the first truly open and friendly smile any human had given during the entire conference. He reached out and did a very human thing. He placed his hand on Kalar's slender, scaly shoulder in a gesture of camaraderie. "Ambassador," Lee said, his voice filled with sincere warmth, "you flatter us." Kalar froze. The touch was not painful, but it was firm. It felt like a statement. Lee Jun continued, "This was just a simple diplomatic mission. What you're talking about, survival, resilience, that's not something special." He paused, thinking of Earth's history, of plagues and wars and natural disasters, of the simple, stubborn will to live that defined his species. That's just what we do every day. He gave Kalar's shoulder a final, gentle pat and let his hand drop. It was nothing, really. Then he turned and walked up the ramp into the blocky, unadorned hull of the Challenger. The hatch closed with the same loud, solid clunk as when it had opened. Ambassador Kalar stood completely still on the docking bay floor. The words echoed in his mind. It was nothing, really. The human captain had just dismissed the most terrifying week of Kalar's life. He had dismissed the bone strength that shrugged off a Borean's charge. He had dismissed the immune system that waged internal war. He had dismissed the mental discipline to box up fear and the analytical power to rewrite galactic resource maps in an hour. He had called it nothing. The ramp retracted. The status lights on the Challenger turned from red to green. With a low, powerful hum that vibrated through the deck plates, the human ship detached from the station. It did not turn gracefully. It simply moved forward, a blunt instrument pushing its way into the void, and then shot away into the darkness, faster than anything that size should be able to move. Kalar finally turned and walked slowly back into the station. The other senior delegates were waiting for him in the hall. Their faces were full of the same question. Scholar Vryn approached him, his feathers flat with anxiety. "Ambassador? What did he say? What is their purpose?" Kalar looked at the small, worried faces around him. He thought of the human's calm eyes and his friendly smile. He thought of the hand on his shoulder. He said, "It was nothing," Kalar whispered. He looked around the beautiful crystal hall, a symbol of galactic cooperation and fragile peace. Then he looked out the large window at the spot where the human ship had vanished. "They believe it," Kalar said, his voice growing stronger, filled with a dreadful certainty. "They truly believe that everything we saw, their strength, their endurance, their minds, is normal. It is so normal to them that it is not even worth mentioning. It is nothing." The meaning of that sank into every delegate in the room. If that was humanity's nothing, what would their something look like? The thought was too horrifying to consider. The Glycian ambassador drew himself up to his full height. He had a new single purpose. He had to guide the galaxy forward into this new frightening era. He addressed the gathered leaders, his voice firm and clear. "Listen to me, all of you," Kalar said. "We have made a treaty with them. We will honor it. We will be polite. We will be helpful. We will trade with them if they wish. But we will not, under any circumstances, ever disturb them. We will not provoke them. We will not ask them for more than they offer." He looked at each of them, making sure they understood. "The greatest service we can do for the galaxy," he said, "is to make sure the humans remain. Content. We must make sure they never have a reason to truly try. We must make sure that nothing is all we ever see." There were no arguments. There were no objections. Every delegate, from the smallest Xylos to the largest Borean, nodded in agreement. It was the only logical choice. The legend of humankind was sealed not by a great war or a grand announcement. It was sealed by a friendly pat on the shoulder and a polite dismissal. The galaxy now looked upon humanity with a single, unified, and very quiet thought. They were the monsters of the void, who did not know they were monsters. And so, the galaxy would tiptoe around them, forever.